Hi, you're listening to a podcast from Karbonmat, a project financed by the Research Council of Norway. Karbonmat deals with the sustainable future of Norwegian agriculture. The project explores how farmers can be rewarded for practices that help capture and store carbon in the soil. It does so by developing business models that can motivate farmers to adopt practices that 1. Improve soil health, 2. Reduce the climate footprint of agriculture, and 3. Maintain food production, while farmers get paid for it. Through 6 episodes, we explore the importance of soil health in agriculture and get to know key researchers in the project. Welcome to the second episode. Today, we visit the University of Western Australia, where project leader and Professor Pia Otte did a research stay together with Professor Natalia Mæhle. In this episode, Natalia sits down with our collaborator, Professor Marit Kragt, to talk about Australia's experiences with carbon farming, what has worked, what has been challenging, and what Norway might learn from it.
Today we have Marit Kragt with us. She is professor in agriculture and resource economics from the University of Western Australia and an expert on adoption of greenhouse gas mitigation in agriculture. Welcome, Marit. Can you tell a little bit about your professional background and your research?
Thank you, Natalia. Great to be with you. So I'm an agricultural economist based in Perth, Western Australia, but I'm originally from the Netherlands. But I've been here for 16 years and 20 years in Australia. And my research is all about climate change mitigation in agriculture, looking at what can farmers do to reduce their emissions, what are barriers to adoption in emission reduction in agriculture, and also working a lot with more interdisciplinary projects with social scientists, agronomists, even agricultural engineers to actually develop new solutions for agricultural industries here.
So how did you become interested in carbon farming?
So I've worked in carbon farming for 16 years now, and that comes from a very first policy that we had in Australia called the Carbon Farming Initiative. When I started working here in Perth, Carbon Farming Initiative was just launched, and we decided to look at this novel policy that targets carbon farming, which was a novel term back then. So we wanted to investigate what is this thing called carbon farming, what can it deliver, and can we actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions or mitigate climate change through this policy. The policy was being created as we were doing our research, so it was really exciting to evaluate the different characteristics of this policy and what the asks was for farmers, how the government was setting this up, and we could evaluate what the economic impacts are on farmers of these different methods that were being proposed. So since, and also I want to work on carbon farming, and I still work on climate change mitigation because it's the most important threat to society, I think, for human society. Mm-hmm. So I want to do my bit in helping.
Yeah, of course. So please tell us a little bit about carbon farming in Australia. What kind of business models you have here? What are the challenges, opportunities? So a little bit about your experience with carbon farming here in Australia.
Fantastic. So carbon farming, as I said, has existed in Australia for a bit over 16 years now. So we're probably one of the first countries in the world to pursue government investment in carbon farming initiative. And we've seen a lot of change over those 16 years. So first of all, the policy has changed with successive governments. So different government investments from Labour to Liberal back to Labour. We had a short period that there was even a carbon price, which was a great incentive to get money into a carbon farming system, but that carbon price was abolished very quickly. So we started with a carbon farming initiative, then we had an emission reduction fund, and now it's called a climate solutions fund. And I'll get back to those policy changes in a bit.
Of course.
But at the same time as these policies were developing, the science was developing. So we were putting perhaps policies out there where the science hadn't yet been proven, which causes a lot of uncertainty in the community about what actually does work on my farm. What sort of things can I do on my farm to improve carbon sequestration, to reduce emissions, maybe to have other nature benefits. We just don't have enough scientific information. Australia is not as good. Australia is a vast country, and we simply don't have as much data and observations as you might have in Europe. So we have a real lack of data, and we had to build the trials to support some of the methodologies that were being developed. So the business model that exists still today is that the federal government has a body called the Clean Energy Regulator, and they put out methodologies, now called methods, which are developed and vetted by a scientific community. And those methodologies prescribe exactly what activities a farmer can undertake that are then eligible for payments or eligible to sell as carbon credits. We have our own domestic carbon credit scheme where we sell Australian carbon credit units. So that's a currency that had to be developed as part of the carbon farming initiative. So that was one progression, that the science was being built as the policy was rolled out, and that was, in my opinion, probably not the best approach, because it caused all this uncertainty. Methodologies were developed and then also taken offline again. So farmers who may have been looking at a methodology, then the year after were no longer eligible for payments because the methodology was either proven not as effective as we thought, or, and this is another level of uncertainty, no longer additional. So our carbon farming policies require an additionality. So you have to do something that's more than what the rest of the community is doing. So you have to do something extra. It has to be permanent. And our understanding of what is permanence has changed as well. It started with 100 years. It's now 25 years. And that has implication for contracts and farmers' willingness to participate. Has to have no leakage. So you shouldn't be displacing an activities. So moving, for example, cattle that emits methane from one area of the country to another area of the country where they still emit methane. So you don't actually have a reduction in emissions. But a good lesson for also for Norway when you're thinking about your business model.
How you can learn something from Karbonmat project.
Look, I think we did a lot of trial and error. And because this whole new market was set up by the government, a lot of what we call project developers were set up as well. So we have dozens of carbon farming developers or project developers that now exist that would have gone out to farmers, knock on their door in some cases, to say, we want to help you adopt these carbon farming practices, plant some trees, or help you mitigate your manure emissions, or take land out of production for regeneration, and then we will share the profit with you from the carbon credits that you're going to generate. So, some of those project developers may not have had the best interest of the farmers themselves in mind. Some of the most productive land for agriculture is also the most productive land for tree plantings, right?
I see.
So there's an incentive for these developers to buy productive land, to plant trees, so that they can sell their carbon credits. But that has implications for social cohesion in the country, with land is no longer being produced, there's less people on the land. We are a vast country.
Definitely. So you have quite big farms.
Very big farms, and if one of those farms is no longer a farm, that's a couple of families that move away from the region, and the schools close down, the hospitals close down. There's all these flow-on effects that are not all due to these carbon developers, but definitely has caused anxiety in the community about carbon farming in general. So it's an important social
acceptance.
I guess a social barrier and just a community. It's a whole of community approach that you need to take. Another lesson is just the complexity of contracting. So if you want to participate in the carbon market in Australia through this ECU scheme, you have to go through all the contracts. What am I going to do on my land? How permanent are these contracts? How does it affect my land value if I want to sell it again? And a lot of paperwork I hear from farmers, and they're not used to paperwork. They don't want to have to deal with paperwork. On the one hand, you could say, great, I can use the project developer to do that for me. But if there's no trust with the project developer, then you're unlikely to engage them, right? And the individual farmer is not going to go through all that paperwork because that's not your core business. Your core business is food production.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I said the science wasn't ready. Another area that wasn't ready is just understanding how much it costs to take these different actions. So soil carbon sequestration, well, we had to do the science of what can we even do in our sandy soils to sequester carbon, or sandy soils where I am in Western Australia. Of course, we can plant trees, but can we do other things that build soil carbon while still producing food? Because that's really important also from a social and identity perspective to farmers, right? So I want to produce my crops. I don't want to produce trees. But what can I do to build soil carbon through my cropping practices? And that's stuff like adding supplements to the soil, retaining my stubble, not disturbing the soil. But we don't know how much carbon that builds. So we had to do all the science to even understand how much carbon is being built. And now, 16 years later, there is actually methods available to get paid for soil carbon, either by directly measuring how much you've built. And that costs time because we had to develop the technology to measure soil carbon at low cost. If you have say 100 hectares to measure, that's gonna be thousands of dollars. So the cost had to come down. There's now more and more tools available to measure soil carbon at low cost. There's even government incentives specifically for soil carbon measurements. I think the aim is to get it under $3 per hectare. We're not there yet. The other methodology is to estimate soil carbon through modeling. And then you can either get paid based on what's observed or based on what's modeled.
So it's a lot of research going on.
A lot of research necessary to build sufficient, if you want, database to develop credible methodologies.
Yeah.
And now the next step is to get that knowledge out to the people who need to adopt it, the farmers. So there's been lots of investment in the last maybe 5 years. In the last 16, but specifically in the last 5 through a government-supported program called the Carbon Farming Outreach Program that delivers workshops to farmers who are interested in this topic, who want to learn more. And from the feedback we've received is, farmers are still really confused. They get this message from the government, they get this other message from the carbon farming outreach providers, and then they get this message from the project developers who probably have the most positive message, but then the news is critical of carbon farming and the policy is changing. So there's a lot of confusion.
So it's a lot to take in.
Yes. And it's not your core business as a farmer. So we've been trying to address that by, the Carbon Farming Outreach Program, as the government's flagship program, is now moving from focusing on farmers to focusing on their advisors. So that support network that farmers have is also being, becoming more knowledgeable. And they've invested in a company, a cooperative research center for zero net emissions agriculture. So the federal government has invested about $80 million in that cooperative research center that builds additional research outputs, but also it has a strong extension and outreach component demonstrating what low emission agriculture would look like, and then hopefully that will build knowledge and convince farmers that this is a profitable approach. Also, state governments and industry organizations like the Grains Research and Development Corporations are starting to invest more and more in what we call demonstration farms.
I see.
So it's where you work one-on-one with a farmer to change practices. It could be soil carbon practices, and they agree to then open their books to others to demonstrate, look, I've done this and it's actually profitable. And I guess it's a matter of time and a lot of one-on-one with these farmers to build enough critical mass.
To build word of mouth and trust.
You have the early adopters, the innovators, the early adopters, and now I think we're slowly starting to see diffusion of that and scaling. I think we're at the start of that scaling period now, but it's taken some time.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Very interesting. We also heard that it's a new initiative which is called Carbon Insetting. So can you please tell us a bit more about it and also how it can be applied in future carbon farming initiatives?
Yeah, fantastic. So I work on a project, we call it Insetting. It's a new business model, so really appropriate for a Karbonmat. It's relatively novel. I haven't seen much on insetting, especially in the academic literature, maybe some in the corporate sector. But it's an up and coming business model that looks at within value chain emission reductions and sequestration. And that is particularly important for carbon farming because agri-food sector has the majority of its emissions at the primary production, at the farmer level. So insetting has occurred in some agri-food supply chains like cocoa, coffee, but also wool, fashion industry, where the what we call the bottom of the supply chain, so the retailer, your McDonald's, your Nestle, your Nescafe, has invested in their primary producers to reduce emissions. For agroforestry, for example, you've seen Nestle investing in agroforestry in their cocoa plantations or Nescafe in their coffee plantations to reduce emissions, and they actually benefit from that because their coffee will now have a lower carbon footprint, or their cocoa will have a lower carbon footprint. So a couple of these big companies are taking action. Another one is Kering, which is a fashion brand that owns Gucci, for example, and that is a whole new business model that needs to be designed. They have a couple of examples that are well known, like the ones I just mentioned, that are doing insetting in their own value chain. But in some other value chains like grains or dairy, we don't really know what the contract will look like, what the picture is, because grain farmers might sell to one buyer 1 year and another buyer another year. It's much easier in a vertically integrated supply chain than in a more disparate supply chain. So I'm working on a project right now for Australia, an Australian agri-food supply chain, to think through what would the model be for different commodities. But the essential idea is that the supply chain comes together, they pool their funds to reduce the footprint of the product that is being sold.
Throughout the whole supply chain.
And take a meat supply chain, you have the livestock, the farmer that sells meat to a feedlot in some cases, then sells it to a meat processor who sells it to, say, a retailer, a supermarket. Now, if the farmer uses anti-methanogenics or changes their grazing practices or adopts manure pond covers, that reduces emissions from that meat. And that benefits the feedlot, it benefits the meat processor, it benefits the retailer. So our insetting model would say, if the retailer and the processor now both pool their money to provide an incentive to their supply chain providers, the farmers, that will strengthen the ties in that supply chain. So you're actually supporting your own producers, and you both benefit because your product has a lower carbon footprint.
Very interesting and sounds very promising. So we hope it will develop. Hopefully,
there's now a global interest in this insetting model. So it's also known as within value chain mitigation, and you see organizations like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the Science Based Target Initiative, actually putting out reports and even guidance and rules on how this could work and how you account and claim the emission reduction, because it goes all the way into corporate accounting for greenhouse gas mitigation.
I see. So based on everything that you have told and also on Australia's long-term experience with carbon farming, could you sum up 3 key things that you can recommend for designing business models in Norway in Karbonmat project?
Absolutely. So I've been working on carbon farming for a very long time, and my angle is always adoption. So I'm not going to comment on the science, I'm going to comment on how do we get these things adopted.
That's good.
And one is it has to be profitable for the farmer. There is not, in Australia is an open market, right? There's no government subsidies for farming. So whatever you do, it has to make sense. The farmer still needs to be profitable and needs to maintain their business. So that's very much in the methodologies. What can farmers do? But also, how do we measure that? And how do we convince the farmer that it is profitable? And in some cases, maybe you do need a subsidy to just get over the initial investment cost. We have seen in Australia changes in policy, and that is still lingering. Every new government has a new policy, and that's really holding back adoption. So policy certainty and contract certainty is important. And finally, we're investigating how do we provide a supporting environment to the farmers through advisors, through your bankers that provide advice, also through social support. You can't expect a person to change into carbon farming if all the farmers around them find that ridiculous, right? You're not going to be the only person doing something different. So it's different support mechanisms that need to be in place to help this change.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Marit. It's been very interesting to hear how carbon farming developed here in Australia, and good luck with your research.
Thank you. Looking forward to doing more with Karbonmat.
Thank you.